Hey guys, so let's you and me talk in this video a little bit about containers and microservices and basically the distinction between the two. So let's get into it. One of the things that may be very confusing to you if you are, say, just starting out, or if you haven't been working much with containers and microservices and all these concepts, is to, like, it might be confusing to you when people are talking about containers, they're talking about Docker, they're talking about microservices, and like, what's the difference? And let me just tell you what the difference. In this is the video where I'm going to try and explain this to you. So let's just define some things first and foremost. A Docker is a container management system. Basically what it allows you to do is that it allows you to box your software, your application that you want to run somewhere, in a package, so that it's very easy for you to move it around, to combine it with other, like, basically you have boxes of different applications running, and it allows you to keep your code very isolated and modular. It's a very powerful tool, but this is not a talk about Docker. Anyway, that's Docker. So, and a container is just a wrapper around your application that is going to provide like environmental things to your system. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that you're building a PHP application. If you are and you want to create a container, that container is going to be a box or a wrapper around your code that is going to have Apache and PHP, because, you know, in order for you to run your application, you're going to need at least that. So what you will do most likely is that you are going to create an image or a container that has Apache and PHP in the environment. So think of it as a very small computer, a very small virtual machine, very, very small. And then you wrap your code in that, and now you have a container that Docker can use in order to start up your web server with everything that your system needs to work. And then you could have, in theory, another container which holds something like a database, like MySQL or something, and then you can say that, all right, connect these two containers together so that they're both running through Docker, and then Docker knows how to connect them, so that your application has now a database container, like your application container can talk to your database container, and they can, you can send data just as you would in any normal system. And basically that's what the container idea is coming from, that you can have several different application containers or systems running in parallel, and they can talk to each other and so forth. But then the question comes, what is a microservice? Because what's the distinction between an application container or a container and a microservice? That is a more philosophical question, and the industry is still trying to define what a microservice actually is. And I can only give you my definition, and the one that I've heard people use that I think is the most descriptive and best of what I'm talking about here. A microservice, in ideal, like at the conceptual level, is a very small application. It's the same thing as I was saying before. It's a container with an application in it, but it's designed to be very, very small and handle something in a very large distributed system. Basically, if you have, let's say that you have some people go really granular and they say that, oh, a microservice is a single function running in a container, and you can call that function and then it can do something. I personally think that the best definition for a microservice is, let's say that you have an application that, a shopping platform. Then you're going to have so-called like different domain objects, such as a product, you're going to have a user, you're going to have a cart, you're going to have like these different concepts that very naturally like falls into like a payment maybe. All these domain models that you very commonly see in domain-driven design and so forth. And they very naturally come into the everyday jargon at your company or on your project. So to me, the best definition of a microservice is that you have a single application, a single API that handles all of these things by itself. It means that you have one application that only deals with products. One application only deals with users. One application only deals with, the cart or whatever you want to call it. That is, to me, a very good way of defining a microservices, basically, because These are what in a monolithic application you would very regularly have like a directory which is called like product, user, cart, so forth. And think of it as taking that directory with all the code that has to do with these different concepts and putting them in their own server and their own container. And that's the difference. That's a microservice. So and that's the distinction we need to make here. A container is just the thing around your application. It has nothing to do with the microservice. You can do microservices without Docker if you wanted to, but the container itself is not the microservice. It's just the wrapper around the application. And a microservice is a conceptual architecture. Now, you don't have, this is a very big misconception. If you want to use Docker, you can do that without having microservices. You can have a monolithic application in a Docker container, and some people do that. I think that's a really cool idea. In the first example, what we did was we packaged our entire PHP application in a container that could run our application, and the only other container we were using was a database, like a MySQL container, so that they could talk to each other. That's a very efficient architecture. It's very useful. It's very handy to work with. But it's not a microservices architecture because you don't need microservices to be able to use Docker. In my personal, like what we do here at my company, we have large containers, like full applications that run in one container, and then you have the databases in other containers. Like we have a container for Redis, we have one for MongoDB, and we have one for our application code. And then we have several different applications that run in different containers, but they are not microservices because we're not splitting things that small. Because there's like microservices, as I have been saying in a few other videos, is it allows you to have a lot of people working on a really large system at the same time. But it's not so valuable to you to have microservices unless you have that type of scale. When you're a smaller company, this architecture that I'm describing to you, like a container architecture, it's much more efficient. So that's basically what this video is about, to kind of to explain to you that, using Docker does not mean that you're doing microservices. And I argue that if you're just starting out, use Docker to do what I was saying. Put your application code in one container, your databases in another container, and there you have it. You're using Docker. Cool, right? And the best part is that if you want to scale that up and someday use microservices, you can do that because you already have the groundwork laid to add more containers and grow your system. So Docker, you just never think that Docker is just for microservices. It's absolutely not. Docker is a powerful tool that can do so much more than microservices. Microservices is just this idea of a application architecture. Hopefully this distinction makes sense to you, and I hope you have a great day.